There is a survival rule in the military. The ones who boast the loudest usually fall the hardest. My sister never learned that. Gripping a glass of dark red wine at our Christmas dinner, Chloe pointed her manicured finger directly at my face in front of the entire table. "Don't mind, Grace," she sneered in front of her guests, as my parents chuckled in agreement. "She's just a military reject, a basket case waiting to be tossed on the street." I did not cry. I did not run out of the room. With the dead calm silence of a strategic officer, I sat back and watched my biological sister dig her own grave. Because the VIP boss she was trying so desperately to impress by trampling on me was the exact person preparing to sign her federal arrest warrant. Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really want to know the ending of this story. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. To understand why I sat at that table without flinching, you need to know what the Hill family took from me when I was 18 years old. I was standing in the living room of my parents' house in Westchester County, holding a single sheet of paper that had just gutted my entire future. The bank statement from First National showed a zero balance. Not low, not reduced. Zero. The college fund my grandparents had built for me over 16 years, every birthday check, every holiday deposit, every dollar my grandfather earned, hauling freight for 40 years, and tucked away. So his youngest grandchild could go to Cornell, all of it gone. My name was printed at the top of the withdrawal slip, but the signature at the bottom was not mine. Someone in this house had forged it. Someone in this house had decided I did not deserve a future. My mother sat on the cold leather couch across from me, flipping through a glossy fashion magazine as if I had asked her about the weather. The scent of her $300 perfume hung in the air, a thick floral cloud that made the back of my throat tighten. I held the bank statement out toward her, my hand steady, my voice controlled. I asked her where the money went. I asked her whose hand signed my name on a legal financial document. She did not look up. She smoothed the silk collar of her blouse with 2 fingers and delivered the execution order to my youth. "Your sister needs to maintain her image to enter the elite circle. You figure it out yourself." The words hit me the way shrapnel hits. Not all at once, but in fragments, each one burying itself deeper than the last. I dropped the paper on the glass coffee table. The sound was barely a whisper against the surface. My father walked through the living room on his way to the garage, his golf shoes clicking on the marble tile. He glanced at me the way a man glances at a piece of furniture he is planning to donate. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not slow his stride. When I was 12, I brought home a first-place science project trophy. I carried it into his study, holding it up with both hands, my heart hammering with the desperate hope that this would be the thing that made him see me. He looked at it for half a second, told me to put it somewhere out of the way, and turned back to his Bloomberg terminal. That was Robert Hill. Every achievement I ever earned was an interruption to his portfolio reviews. Every report card was a document he never opened. Every recital was a seat he never filled. I walked out the front door without shedding a single tear. I walked 3 miles in the freezing rain. My sneakers were soaked through by the second mile. The cold turned my fingers white, and the rain ran down the back of my neck and pooled in the collar of my shirt. But I did not stop. I walked straight to the military recruiting center on 5th and Broad. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed and flickered against water-stained ceiling tiles. A staff sergeant behind a dented metal desk looked up at me, looked at my soaked jeans and dripping hair, and asked if I was lost. I told him I was not lost. I told him I wanted to enlist. I asked him when I shipped out for basic training. He slid the ROTC paperwork across the desk. I picked up his government-issued pen. The weight of it felt different from any pen I had ever held, heavier, more permanent, as if the ink inside carried a different kind of contract. I signed my real name on every line, my actual signature, not the forgery my parents used to rob me. That pen became the first brick in a wall I would spend the next 14 years building between myself and every person who shared my last name. The recruiter watched me sign each page without hesitation. He asked if I wanted to call anyone, a parent, a guardian, a friend. I told him there was no one to call. I traded a toxic mansion for a military barracks. I learned to build my own financial empire through field pay, combat deployment bonuses, and ruthless investment of every dollar the government deposited into my account. I ate chow hall food while my sister dined at country clubs. I ran 5 miles at dawn while she slept until noon in silk sheets, bought with my stolen inheritance. I bought my first apartment at 23, with cash saved from deployment. I maxed out my thrift savings plan at 25. By 30, I held a real estate portfolio and a security clearance that Robert's Wall Street buddies could only dream about. But my family never knew any of that. Because I never told them. And because I never begged Robert for a single dime, he labeled me a destitute freeloader living off government handouts. He told his golf partners at the club that his youngest daughter was a charity case surviving on food stamps and military welfare. He said it loudly at dinner parties within earshot of people who mattered to him. My poverty was his punchline. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter brunch in that house was a ritual of humiliation dressed up as tradition. Susan would seat me at the far end of the table near the kitchen door, as if I were the hired help who might need to fetch something. Chloe always sat at my father's right hand directly beneath the chandelier where the light made her jewelry sparkle, and her smile gleam for the relatives who came to worship at the altar of Hill family success. I sat at family dinners year after year eating in silence while they mocked my plain civilian clothes. Chloe once held up the sleeve of my gray sweater between two fingers, the way a person holds a dirty dish rag, and asked if the Salvation Army was running a 2-for-1 special. My parents laughed. Robert lifted his wine glass to his lips and smiled. Susan covered her mouth with her napkin not to hide her laughter, but to savor it. I logged every insult. I cataloged every smirk, every eye roll, every condescending pat on the shoulder. I was not sulking. I was calculating. I was mapping their psychological blind spots the same way I mapped hostile terrain before a tactical operation. Every insult they threw at me was a data point, and data points are ammunition. The last time I visited before that Christmas dinner, my mother tried to hand me a $20 bill to pay for my gas home. She held it out between two fingers, a sick smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth, the way you tip a parking valet you feel sorry for. I looked at the bill. Then I looked directly into her eyes with the cold, flat stare of a sniper dialing in the windage on a long-range target. I pushed her hand away with the back of my wrist. Not violently, precisely. The way you redirect a weapon that is pointed in the wrong direction. I picked up my keys from the granite counter, walked to my car, and drove away in absolute silence. In the rearview mirror, I watched her standing in the doorway, still holding that crumpled 20, her smirk slowly dissolving into something she could not name. Confusion, maybe. Or the first small tremor of a foundation that was about to collapse. The truth about my military career was something I carried like a loaded weapon in a concealed holster. Nobody in the Hill family knew that I was Major Grace Hill, Senior Strategic Officer at the Joint Special Operations Command. To them, I was a paper-pushing logistics clerk who answered phones and filed requisition forms on a base somewhere in Virginia. I maintained that cover story for years, not because I was ashamed, because operational security demanded it. My unit ran classified operations that never made the evening news, never received public credit, and never left a traceable footprint. The missions I planned saved lives that would never know my name. The operators I supported trusted me with information that could topple governments if it leaked. I was a ghost, and ghosts do not send family newsletters. I sat alone in my secure apartment one evening, polishing the silver star I had received for a classified extraction that pulled 3 wounded operators out of a collapsing safe house in a country I am still not allowed to name. The metal was heavy in my palm, not just in weight, but in memory. Every scratch on the ribbon corresponded to a moment where the distance between life and death was measured in inches. The scars on my left forearm where the shrapnel tore through my sleeve throbbed with a dull, familiar ache in the cold weather. I ran my thumb across the raised points of the star, feeling the ridges, then locked it inside a biometric safe bolted to the floor of my closet. On the shelf above the safe sat a framed photograph of my team, 8 men and women in full tactical gear, their faces blacked out per protocol, standing in front of a helicopter in a country that does not exist on any public map. They were the only family portrait I owned that did not make me sick. Next to the frame sat a battered challenge coin from my first deployment, scratched and dull from years of being carried in my pocket. I picked it up and turned it over in my fingers. The weight of it grounded me the way no Hill family heirloom ever had. That same week, a message from Colonel Hayes lit up my encrypted terminal. A joint operation had been greenlit, and he needed my threat assessment by 0 dark. I closed the safe, sat at my desk, and worked until 3 a.m. That was my life. Medals I could never show. Missions I could never mention. I remembered the day I achieved the rank of major. The promotion ceremony was held on base in a wood-paneled room with polished floors and an American flag that stretched from ceiling to floor. My commanding officer stood facing me, his voice steady as he read the citation. My team stood at attention behind me, men and women who had bled beside me and would do it again without being asked. When the oak leaves were pinned to my shoulders, Sergeant Briggs, the same man who left protein bars on my bunk during my first deployment, was in the second row. He caught my eye and gave me a nod so small nobody else saw it. That nod carried more pride than anything the Hill family had ever aimed in my direction. I made the mistake of mailing a formal invitation to my parents' house afterward. The heavy cardstock was embossed in gold, printed with the official seal of the United States Army. I had addressed it by hand, writing their names in the careful, precise lettering I learned in officer candidate school. It was a momentary lapse, a brief, stupid crack in my armor where the 18-year-old girl who once wanted her father's approval leaked through like blood through a bandage. I walked into their kitchen the next afternoon. The invitation was crumpled in the trash can wedged between a used coffee filter and an empty yogurt container. The gold embossing was stained brown with coffee grounds. The seal of the United States Army was smeared with something that looked like bacon grease. Robert walked past me, his phone pressed to his ear, loudly telling his golf buddy that his youngest daughter was a complete stain on the family legacy. He said the word stain, the way a dry cleaner says it with clinical disgust, as if I were a blemish on fabric he intended to discard. A civilian would have screamed. I adjusted my posture, squaring my shoulders until my spine was a steel rod. I used tactical breathing. 4 seconds in. 4 seconds hold. 4 seconds out. The rage did not disappear. It compressed. It became a dense, cold mass sitting behind my ribs like a round in the chamber, waiting for the precise moment to be released. I recognized the bitter reality right then. Strangers in uniform would die for me. The people who shared my DNA wanted to drown me in dirt. A sergeant named Briggs from my first deployment once noticed I never received mail. No care packages, no birthday cards, no letters from home. The other soldiers had stacks of envelopes and boxes from Walmart and homemade cookies in tin foil. My bunk had nothing. Briggs asked me one evening while we cleaned our gear under a bare bulb in the barracks if I had family back in the States. I told him I did, technically. He looked at my face, read something in my expression that only soldiers understand without words, and never brought it up again. He just started leaving an extra protein bar on my bunk every Sunday morning. That silent gesture from a man I had known for 6 weeks carried more warmth than 32 years of Hill family Christmases combined. Chloe walked into the kitchen that same day, spotted my plain gray sweater, and let out a laugh that sounded like a champagne cork popping in a room full of people who were already drunk on their own superiority. She asked me if I had gotten dressed in the dark again, or if the Army had started issuing fashion violations along with dog tags. I did not engage. I turned my back to her, poured my black coffee into a ceramic mug, and set it down on the granite counter with the controlled finality of someone closing a classified file for the last time. I pulled out my phone, opened the family group chat, scrolled past 3 years of messages I had never responded to, and deleted it. I made a vow to my unit and to myself that I would never again seek validation from enemy combatants living inside my own family tree. Exactly 1 month before Christmas, Chloe knocked on my apartment door. She held up an expensive bottle of vintage Napa Valley wine, tilting the label toward me so I could see the vineyard name, and more importantly, the price tag she had conveniently left attached. She flashed a fake, practiced PR smile, the one she used at corporate galas and investor dinners, all teeth. No warmth, the kind of smile that exists only to make the person wearing it feel powerful. She had recently been promoted to PR director for Vanguard Defense, a private military contractor that had been aggressively clawing for Pentagon contracts for the past 2 years. She told me she was in the neighborhood. She told me she missed me. She told me we should catch up like real sisters, as if real sisters was something we had ever been. With the trained eyes of an intelligence officer, I immediately identified the deception. Her pupils dilated a fraction wider than normal when she glanced past my shoulder into the apartment. Her left hand gripped the wine bottle neck with slightly too much pressure, whitening the knuckles beneath her French manicure. Her smile never reached her eyes. The micro-expressions were textbook. She wanted something that was inside my apartment, and the wine was the entry ticket. I let her in. I played the naive younger sister. I walked into the kitchen, pulled out a wooden cutting board, and began arranging cheese and crackers with the slow, deliberate movements of a woman who appeared to have all the time in the world and none of the suspicion. I positioned myself near the microwave. The black glass door gave me a perfect reflected line of sight down the hallway into my home office. Every angle calculated, every reflection mapped. I sliced cheddar into thin, even strips while in the dark mirror of the microwave door, I watched Chloe glance toward the kitchen, confirm I was distracted, and slip out of the living room with the practiced silence of a scavenger approaching a carcass. She entered my office. She approached the desk. She opened my personal laptop, an air-gapped machine I kept deliberately disconnected from the internet, loaded with raw theoretical frameworks and research concepts that would look like a hobbyist's notes to a civilian, but would make any military intelligence analyst's blood run cold. The laptop was bait, and Chloe was the exact species of predator it was designed to attract. On the screen sat the Cerberus Protocol, my original framework for integrating artificial intelligence into unmanned combat systems. I had spent 14 months building it. Nights after missions when the adrenaline would not let me sleep. Weekends between deployments when most people went home to their families, and I stayed on base because I had no family worth going home to. Every algorithm, every tactical integration model, every line of code was mine, written in my blood and my discipline and my solitude. Chloe's eyes widened. Even in the distorted reflection of the microwave glass, I could see the greed reshape her face. Her lips parted. She leaned closer to the screen, her designer perfume leaving a chemical trail across my desk. She believed she was looking at the private hobby project of a failed logistics clerk, a sad little sister playing pretend with computers. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a USB drive. The metallic scrape of the connector sliding into the port was barely audible from the kitchen, but I heard it the way a hunter hears a twig snap in an otherwise silent forest. She copied the entire directory. Every file, every folder, every line of the protocol I had built from nothing. She never saw the digital tripwires embedded in every document. She never understood that the laptop was a honeypot, a baited trap sitting open on the desk of a woman who had spent her entire career designing exactly these kinds of operations. Chloe was not robbing her sister. She was stepping on a landmine and smiling while she did it. She strutted back into the kitchen a few minutes later, her purse slightly heavier with stolen federal intellectual property, her smile slightly wider with the self-satisfaction of a predator who believed the kill was clean. She poured herself a full glass of the wine she had brought, drained it in 2 long gulps, and set the empty glass on my counter with a sharp click. She patted my shoulder with the condescending softness of a person petting a stray dog they have no intention of adopting. She told me I should really try to make something of my life. She said she worried about me sometimes. She said maybe one day I would find my purpose the way she had found hers. I gave her a flat, unreadable nod. The same nod I gave hostile informants in the field before their entire network was rolled up. The moment the front door clicked shut behind her, I set down the cheese knife. I walked into my office. The chair was still warm from where she had sat. Her perfume lingered in the air like a toxin. I pulled up the command terminal on a secondary secure device. The access log glowed on the screen. Time stamped. Device identified. Packet traced. Every file she touched, every second she spent on the machine, every byte she transferred was recorded in a log that would hold up in any federal court in the country. I initiated the threat assessment sequence and leaned back in my chair. Chloe Hill had just stolen classified military intellectual property from a JSOC strategic officer and walked out the door believing she had robbed her helpless little sister of a hobby project. The corner of my mouth twitched. Not a smile. A trigger pull. 3 weeks after the theft, the confirmation hit my desk at JSOC Vanguard Defense had officially submitted a revolutionary AI weapons integration bid to the Pentagon's procurement division. The proposal was 72 pages long, dense, with technical specifications, tactical integration timelines, and deployment frameworks. I read every page. My algorithms, my models, my variable names, my code architecture. The only thing Chloe had changed was the cover page. She had replaced my name with hers and slapped the Vanguard Defense logo across the top in glossy corporate blue. The project director's signature at the bottom of the executive summary belonged to Chloe Hill. She had packaged my 14 months of work, stamped her name on it, and presented it to the United States government as her own corporate masterpiece to secure a multi-million-dollar defense contract. She had not even bothered to reformat the document headers or change the internal file naming conventions I used. My personal annotation style, the way I marked version numbers with a dash and a date code, was visible on every single page. She was so convinced I was nobody that she did not even think to scrub the evidence of my authorship. The arrogance was staggering, but arrogance was useful to me. Arrogant people do not cover their tracks because they never believe anyone is watching. The theft was only the opening salvo. The real weapon came next. A captain named Torres, a fellow officer I had served alongside at JSOC for 3 years, caught my arm in the corridor outside the operations center. He pulled me to the side near the water fountain where the security cameras had a blind spot. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He avoided my eyes. He asked me in a low voice that barely cleared the hum of the building's ventilation if I was doing okay. He said he had heard some things from a contact in the defense contracting world. A PR executive at Vanguard Defense had been circulating information through Washington's lobbying circuit, claiming that I suffered from severe PTSD, that I was prone to violent delusions and paranoid episodes, that I was on the verge of being medically discharged from the military, that I had a history of fabricating stories for attention and sympathy. Torres looked uncomfortable telling me this. He tugged at the collar of his uniform and told me he did not believe a word of it, but he thought I should know. I stood perfectly still. I gave him nothing. No flinch, no widening of the eyes, no sharp intake of breath. I asked him in a voice as flat as a briefing report who had told him. He named a defense lobbyist who worked the Pentagon corridor, a man who lunched with contractors and congressional aides 3 times a week. I traced the chain backward in my head. Lobbyist to contractor network to Vanguard's PR department to Chloe Hill. The architecture of the smear campaign was elegant in its cruelty. She had stolen my work, and then she had preemptively destroyed my credibility, so that if I ever tried to reclaim it, the entire defense establishment would dismiss me as a deranged, jealous lunatic making things up. She wanted to strip away my fundamental right to be believed. She wanted to weaponize the stigma of combat trauma, the invisible wounds that real soldiers carry with real courage, and turn it into a PR tool to cover her theft. I thanked Torres. I told him I appreciated his honesty. He squeezed my shoulder once the way soldiers do when words are not enough, and walked away. I stood in that corridor for 10 seconds perfectly still, my hands clasped behind my back. Then I walked to the parking garage, sat in the driver's seat of my car, and gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked under my knuckles. The engine was off. The garage was silent except for the distant echo of a car door closing 3 levels above me. I sat in the half-darkness and let the full scope of it settle into my bones. My sister had stolen my life's work. She had put her name on it, and then she had salted the earth behind her so thoroughly that anyone I told the truth to would see me as the liar, not her. I did not break down. I did not call her to scream. I did not cry in a parked car in a military garage. I opened my encrypted terminal on the secure phone mounted to my dashboard and flagged Vanguard Defense's Pentagon bid for a covert security review through the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. I typed the request with steady fingers, each keystroke deliberate and final. In the subject line, I wrote a single word that reclassified everything: espionage. My sister was no longer a toxic family member. She was an active threat against United States military security. I turned the ignition pulled out of the garage and drove back to the main building. My face in the rearview mirror was a cold mask of absolute resolve. The 18-year-old girl who walked 3 miles in the rain to a recruiting office was gone. In her place sat a major who had just authorized the first phase of a campaign her family did not know had started. I stood inside the secure server room at JSOC 2 days before Christmas. The air was cold and dry, stripped of humidity by military-grade climate control that kept the equipment at optimal temperature and the humans at minimal comfort. Server racks towered around me in rows, humming with a low, constant vibration that I could feel in my teeth. Colonel Ethan Hayes stood beside me, his arms crossed over his broad chest, his jaw locked in the hard line of a man who had commanded combat units across 4 continents and had zero tolerance for anyone who threatened his operators or his mission. The system had detected a ping. My air-gapped laptop was the honeypot, and the trap had sprung exactly as I designed it. The moment Chloe plugged the stolen USB drive into a connected terminal at Vanguard Defense to upload the bid through the Pentagon's procurement servers, she activated my embedded tracker. The code was hidden inside the metadata of every document she copied, invisible to civilian tech teams, designed to phone home the instant it touched a networked machine. The monitor in front of us flashed red. Vanguard's corporate IP address, the exact MAC address of the USB drive, the timestamp of every file transfer accurate to the millisecond. The data trail was as clean and undeniable as a bullet hole in a concrete wall. Hayes leaned forward, reading the log line by line. His eyes narrowed. A vein pulsed at his temple. This was no longer a family dispute. A civilian contractor had stolen classified military intellectual property from a JSOC officer's personal research and submitted it to the United States government under a fraudulent identity. Hayes turned to me. His voice was low-controlled and heavy with the authority of a man who had sent people to prison and to early graves in equal measure. He authorized a full DCIS investigation. He told me that once this process started, there was no stopping it. I placed my palms flat against the cold steel surface of the nearest server rack, feeling the vibration of the machines against my skin, and confirmed the authorization. Later that same night, I drove home from the Christmas dinner. The dinner where Chloe pointed her manicured finger at my face and called me a basket case. The dinner where my parents laughed on cue like trained performers. The highway was empty and dark, and my headlights carved 2 white beams through the black air ahead of me. My phone vibrated in the center console. I glanced at the screen. Aunt Martha, my mother's older sister, the only person in the entire Hill bloodline who had ever treated me with something resembling human decency. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, the overhead lights buzzing and flickering above my car like insects trapped in glass. I shut off the engine and opened Aunt Martha's message. She had sent a secure PDF attachment with a single line of text above it. The text read, "They made me promise to never tell you. I am done keeping their secrets." I tapped the PDF open and stared at the screen. Scanned copies of yellowed bank documents from 14 years ago. The original withdrawal forms from First National for my grandparents' trust fund. And there, stapled to the back of the final page, was the proof I had spent half my life suspecting, but never confirming. A handwritten note from Robert to the bank manager on personal stationery embossed with his initials, requesting the early liquidation of the trust and authorizing the full transfer of funds into Chloe's personal checking account. Purpose noted on the form in Robert's sharp, slanted handwriting: vehicle purchase. They bought Chloe a $60,000 luxury car with money my grandfather earned hauling freight with broken hands. The note was dated 3 weeks before my 18th birthday, before I was even old enough to legally access the account or challenge the withdrawal. They had planned it, coordinated it, executed it with the cold precision of a financial crime, because that is exactly what it was. I stared at those yellowed documents on my phone screen in the gas station lot. The fluorescent lights hummed above my car. A semi-truck rumbled past on the highway, shaking the ground beneath my tires. I felt the last chain connecting me to the word family snap clean. Not with a dramatic crack. With a quiet surgical break, like a suture being cut after the wound has already been sealed. They had never viewed me as a daughter. I was the account they drained so the golden child could shine brighter. Every dinner I sat through, every insult I absorbed, every $20 bill Susan waved in my face was a line item in a ledger that had been balanced against me before I was old enough to read it. I locked the phone. I stepped out into the freezing December air. The cold hit my lungs like a blade, and I exhaled a long, steady breath that turned to white vapor under the buzzing lights. I watched it dissolve. The time for endurance was over. The time for justice had arrived. As I stared at the irrefutable proof of my parents' 14-year betrayal, I realized some bloodlines are nothing but parasites. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to survive, please like this video and share your story below. Hit subscribe, because the military-grade revenge I unleashed on them is about to begin. The morning after the Christmas dinner, I stood at parade rest inside Colonel Hayes's office at the Pentagon. The room was sparse and functional. An oak desk that had survived 3 administrations. An American flag standing in the corner with its gold fringe catching the overhead light. A wall of framed commendations and unit citations that most civilians would never hold the clearance to read. 2 senior agents in dark suits flanked the heavy desk. The FBI agent was a man in his 50s with silver at his temples, and a tie knotted so precisely it looked like it was holding his entire composure in place. The DCIS agent was a woman with sharp eyes behind wireframe reading glasses and a pen that she clicked with the steady rhythm of a metronome counting down to detonation. I unclasped my hands from behind my back and dropped a thick red-tagged dossier onto the center of the oak desk. The thud echoed in the quiet room like a gavel striking wood. Inside that dossier was everything. The honeypot access logs showing exactly when Chloe opened my laptop and what files she touched. The hardware tracker codes that mapped the USB drive's journey from my apartment to her Vanguard terminal to the Pentagon bid submission portal. Copies of every defamatory email Chloe had sent to defense contractors and Washington lobbyists regarding my mental health, each one time-stamped and IP traced back to her corporate account. Screenshots of her whisper campaign cross-referenced with Torres's testimony, and 3 additional corroborating statements from officers who had been approached with the same false narrative about my psychological fitness. And at the bottom of the stack, Aunt Martha's scanned documents proving the 14-year-old forgery and theft of my grandparents' trust fund. The FBI agent leafed through the pages slowly. His eyes moved with the methodical precision of a man who had read thousands of evidence packages and knew exactly what a conviction looked like on paper. He paused on the tracker data, his index finger tracing the file transfer timeline with the care of a surgeon following a vein. He paused again on the forged bank documents, holding the scanned copies up to the light and examining the handwriting analysis Aunt Martha had included. He paused a 3rd time on the emails where Chloe described me as dangerously unstable, reading each one twice before setting it aside. The DCIS agent had stopped clicking her pen. She was taking notes in a leather-bound notebook, her handwriting tight and rapid, filling the page with shorthand that would later become the backbone of a federal indictment. Then the FBI agent closed the folder, placed both of his hands flat on the desk, and looked up at me. His gaze was steady clinical testing. He told me that executing this warrant meant charging my sister with industrial espionage under the Economic Espionage Act. Minimum sentence 15 years in federal prison. He told me that the DCIS investigation would expand to include Robert and Susan as co-conspirators in the financial fraud. He told me bluntly that pursuing this path would utterly and permanently destroy my family. He laid his pen on the table, leaned back in his chair, and offered me one final chance to retract the files. I did not flinch. I did not shift my weight. I did not break eye contact. I kept my hands clasped behind my back. My spine rigid, my breathing locked into the 4-count rhythm that had carried me through combat zones and classified operations and the worst nights of my life. I looked the agent dead in the eye and delivered my final assessment. They are criminals threatening military security. Execute the law according to protocol. Zero leniency. The words came out the way fire commands come out in the field. Flat, final, non-negotiable. The FBI agent held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once, a single downward motion of his chin, and closed the dossier with a definitive slap. The DCIS agent clicked her pen one final time and began drafting the warrants. The room smelled like old paper and new justice. Colonel Hayes sat back in his chair. A dangerous, razor-thin smile crossed his weathered face, the smile of a man who had set ambushes in 5 countries and understood that the most effective trap is the one the target walks into believing they have already won. He picked up the secure desk phone and dialed the Pentagon Procurement Division. His voice shifted into the smooth professional cadence of a senior officer making a routine coordination call. He ordered them to contact Vanguard Defense immediately. He told them to inform the Hill family that the Pentagon was deeply impressed with their proposal and was prepared to finalize the contract at an exclusive signing ceremony. He emphasized the word exclusive. He told them to mention that senior Pentagon leadership would be present. He told the agents to prepare the SCIF in the basement level to sweep it clean of any recording devices and to have the full FBI arrest team positioned inside the room and standing by before the family arrived. He hung up the phone and looked at me with the expression of a commander who had just sealed every exit on a target building. I gave a crisp nod. I turned on my heel and marched out of the office. The hallway stretched ahead of me, long and polished, lined with portraits of generals. I walked past every one of them without seeing a single face. I saw only the next 7 days laid out like a tactical map, with every approach covered and every exit sealed. At 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, Robert Susan and Chloe Hill strutted through the endless corridors of the Pentagon. They were draped in designer armor. Robert wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit with a burgundy silk pocket square and Italian leather shoes that clicked against the military-grade flooring with the rhythm of a man who believed every hallway in the world was built to receive him. Susan carried a quilted Chanel clutch against her hip and walked with the rehearsed posture of a woman entering a charity gala, chin raised, shoulders back, eyes scanning for cameras. Chloe wore a cream Valentino blazer over a silk blouse, her hair blown out to a professional shine, her stiletto heels so sharp they could cut through the self-importance radiating from her every pore. Their faces were plastered with the sickening, self-satisfied smiles of civilians who believed they were about to be crowned Washington royalty. They believed the heavy double doors at the end of the corridor led to a champagne reception and a multi-million-dollar contract signing that would launch Vanguard Defense into the upper tier of Pentagon vendors. An armed guard in dress uniform met them at the final security checkpoint. He did not smile. He did not make small talk. He checked their identification, scanned their belongings through an X-ray machine, confiscated their cell phones, and placed them in a signal-blocking pouch, and silently directed them down a windowless corridor with bare walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. No artwork. No nameplates on doors. No signs. Just gray paint and locked steel doors and the suffocating quiet of a building designed to contain secrets. The guard stopped at a vault-style door and punched a code into the electronic keypad. The door unsealed with a heavy hydraulic hiss. He gestured them inside without a word. They entered a SCIFA, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. A windowless room encased in steel and concrete, engineered to block every electronic signal, every radio wave, every cellular connection to the outside world. The walls were bare. The floor was cold steel. A single metal table sat bolted to the center of the room, surrounded by metal chairs under the merciless glare of overhead fluorescent panels that turned every surface the color of bleached bone. There was no champagne. There were no politicians. There were no congratulatory handshakes waiting for them. The heavy vault door swung shut behind them with a deep, airtight metallic thud that echoed through the room and settled into their spines. The sound of a cage sealing. Colonel Hayes sat at the head of the metal table. His dress uniform was pressed to perfection, every ribbon aligned, every crease lethal. Against the walls stood 4 figures in dark suits, credentials hanging from lanyards, faces expressionless. FBI. DCIS. They stood the way federal agents stand when they are about to make an arrest, relaxed in the shoulders, still in the hands. Ready. Chloe hesitated for a fraction of a second. Her right heel stuttered against the steel floor. Her PR smile wavered at the edges. But her ego, that massive, polished, diamond-plated ego that had carried her through every boardroom and press conference and family dinner where she had sat on the throne my parents built for her, overrode her instincts in the space of a heartbeat. She puffed out her chest, straightened her blazer, and stepped forward. She announced that the Hill family was honored to attend. She announced that Robert and Susan had traveled from New York to witness the historic moment Vanguard Defense was awarded the Pentagon contract. She extended her manicured hand toward Colonel Hayes with the expectation that he would rise to meet it. Hayes did not stand. He did not reach for her hand. He did not blink. He intertwined his fingers on the cold metal table and stared at Chloe with a contempt so pure it could have stripped paint from the walls. The ventilation system hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Chloe's hand hung in the air between them, fingers extended, waiting. "There will be no contract, Ms. Hill." Hayes's voice was low and flat and carried the finality of a steel door closing. "You are all here for a federal criminal investigation." Robert's face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug beneath his skin. Susan's hand shot to the edge of the table, her lacquered nails scraping against the steel. Chloe's extended hand dropped to her side. Her PR smile collapsed. The projector behind Hayes ignited. A blue-white beam slashed through the air and splashed across the far wall. Glowing red on the screen were the access logs. The MAC address of the USB drive, the tracker data, the file transfer timeline, the digital fingerprints of every document Chloe had stolen from my laptop tracked through Vanguard's network and submitted to the Pentagon under her own name. Robert's Wall Street survival instincts misfired in the worst possible direction. He slammed his fist on the metal table hard enough to make the projector image tremble. He shouted that this was a shakedown. He shouted that he would call the most expensive lawyers in Washington and drag the United States military through the most public, most humiliating lawsuit in the history of the Pentagon. He jabbed his finger at Hayes and demanded to know if the colonel understood who he was dealing with. The FBI agents against the wall did not flinch. They had heard this exact performance from 100 different wealthy men in 100 different rooms. The money and the threats never changed. Neither did the outcome. The lead FBI agent stepped forward. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had served more arrest warrants than Robert had traded stocks. His right hand rested near his belt where a pair of steel handcuffs glinted under the lights. He informed Robert in a voice as flat and immovable as a court filing that his daughter Chloe Hill was being arrested for violations of the Economic Espionage Act, theft of classified military intellectual property, and fraud against the United States government. Susan erupted. She lunged forward from her chair, slamming both palms flat against the metal table with a sharp, frantic slap that echoed through the sealed room. Her Chanel clutch tumbled to the floor. Her composure, her silk blouse, her carefully maintained image of upper-class refinement, all of it shattered in a single breath. Her voice cracked upward into a pitch that was part scream, part wail, and entirely unhinged. "Impossible! You're all crazy. Chloe is a genius if anyone stole it. It was my useless daughter, Grace. She's psycho, she set her sister up. Arrest Grace, my mother." Standing in a federal facility inside the Pentagon, surrounded by FBI agents and military officers, and her response to her eldest daughter's arrest was to sacrifice her youngest. She wanted them to arrest the invisible clerk, the girl in the gray sweater, the basket case she had mocked at every dinner table for 14 years. She was willing to throw me into a federal prison to save Chloe. She was willing to trade one daughter for the other without hesitation, and she had been making that same trade since the day she forged my name on those bank documents. Colonel Hayes slammed both of his hands down onto the metal table. Enough. The roar that erupted from his chest was the acoustic force of a combat commander who had called fire missions under enemy contact and silenced entire rooms of generals with a single word. The sound wave hit the steel walls and bounced back through the room like a physical shockwave. Susan's mouth snapped shut mid-scream. Her body recoiled as if she had been struck. She collapsed backward into her chair, her hands trembling against the table, her mascara running in black streaks down her face, her eyes wide and glassy with a terror she had never experienced in the safety of her Westchester mansion. The room went dead silent. The projector hummed. The ventilation system whispered. And then from the left side of the SCIF, the secondary security door began to open. The only sound left in that room was the slow, rhythmic click of leather dress shoes striking the steel floor. One step, then another, then another. Each footfall was measured, precise, timed with the deliberate cadence of a military officer approaching a formation. I stepped out of the shadows of the observation corridor and walked into the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent light. I was no longer the girl in the faded gray sweater. I was no longer the logistics clerk they pitied and dismissed and mocked over Thanksgiving turkey. I was wearing my pristine army dress blue uniform pressed to a razor crease fitted to regulation, carrying 14 years of service on its fabric. The golden oak leaves of a major sat on my shoulders, catching the overhead light. Campaign ribbons were stacked with geometric precision across my chest, each one representing a deployment, a mission, a sacrifice that my family never knew about and never cared to ask about. And pinned securely over my heart, gleaming under the fluorescent glare like a small cold star that had been waiting years to be seen, was the silver star. Robert stared at me. His mouth hung open. His hands, the same hands that had crumpled my promotion invitation and thrown it in the trash, lay flat and trembling on the metal table. Susan pressed both hands over her mouth, her entire body shaking in the chair. The woman who had just demanded my arrest was looking at a decorated major of the United States military and realizing second by second that every assumption she had ever made about her youngest daughter was a lie she had told herself to justify what she had done to me. Colonel Hayes rose from his chair. He straightened to his full height, squared his shoulders toward my parents, and looked at them with an expression that combined absolute contempt with the cold fury of a man whose officer had been attacked by the very people who should have protected her. "The person you call a useless psycho is Major Grace Hill, Senior Strategic Officer of JSOC, he stated. His voice filled the room with a weight that pressed down on every person sitting at that table. "She bled on the most brutal battlefield so you could sit around drinking champagne. Your stupidity doesn't just insult her, it insults the United States military." Chloe's legs gave out. Her designer heels twisted sideways, the stiletto points scraping against the steel floor, and she collapsed. Her cream blazer crumpled against the cold metal ground. She looked up at me from below her face, a wreck of smeared makeup and disbelief, and stammered that this was impossible. That I was just a paper pusher. That this had to be a mistake. I stepped forward. I stopped exactly half a pace from her trembling form on the floor. I looked down at my sister. There was no anger in my eyes. No hatred. No gloating. Only the absolute cold authority of a person who had been forged in fire while her abuser sipped champagne in an air-conditioned office built on stolen work. "You always thought this uniform was meant to be trampled on, Chloe," I said. My voice was quiet. It did not need volume. It cut through the silence the way a scalpel cuts through tissue. "But you forgot that the people who wear it hold the power to protect the law, and today that law is going to crush you. Going to..." The FBI agent stepped past me. He reached down, took hold of Chloe's wrists, and pulled her arms behind her back with the practiced efficiency of a man who had performed this action hundreds of times. The dry metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting closed echoed through the SCIF. Click, click, click. Each one sharp, final, irreversible, a period at the end of a sentence that had taken 14 years to write. Robert sat frozen in his chair. His hands lay flat on the table, the gold cufflinks on his French cuff shirt catching the light, with an irony so sharp it could draw blood. His eyes were locked on the campaign ribbons stacked across my chest, and behind those eyes I could see the recalculation happening in real time. The mental spreadsheet of a lifetime rewriting itself. Every crumpled invitation. Every golf course joke about his charity case daughter. Every time he told his friends that his youngest was a stain on the family name. Every report card he never opened, every recital seat he never filled, every phone call he never returned. The numbers were running, and the balance was collapsing, and the Wall Street pragmatist who measured human worth in bank statements was realizing with the slow, crushing certainty of a man watching his own building come down that the daughter he threw away was worth more than everything he had spent his life building. My mother slid from her chair and dropped to her knees on the steel floor. She reached toward Chloe as the agents pulled her upright and began walking her toward the door. Susan wailed, a deep, guttural animal sound that rose from somewhere beneath language and reason. She was not crying for me. She had never cried for me. She was crying because the golden child was being taken away in handcuffs, and the entire system she and Robert had built over 3 decades to elevate Chloe at my expense had just been demolished by the very daughter they used as its foundation. I did not blink. I did not speak another word. There were no more words needed. 14 years of silence had been broken in a single room, and the silence that followed was mine to own. I turned my back to them. I squared my shoulders, feeling the weight of the oak leaves and the silver star settle against my uniform like armor that had waited a lifetime to be worn in front of the people who should have seen it first. I marched toward the heavy steel doors of the SCIF. My boots struck the floor in a steady, even cadence, the same cadence I learned on my first day of basic training when I traded their cruelty for my country's service. Behind me, Chloe was sobbing. Susan was screaming my name. Robert was silent. I did not turn around. I did not look back. There was nothing behind me that I needed. The steel doors opened. Bright hallway light poured through the gap, washing over my uniform, catching the silver star above my heart, and sending a small flash of reflected light across the corridor wall. I stepped through the threshold and let the doors swing shut behind me. The heavy metallic thud sealed them inside with the consequences of their own choices inside the cage their own greed had built for them. I walked down the Pentagon corridor alone. The fluorescent light stretched ahead of me in a long, unbroken line, and my reflection moved across the polished floor beneath me like a second soldier keeping pace. My boots echoed against the tile with a sound that was clean and steady and entirely my own. Each step carried me further from the people who shared my blood and closer to the only family that had ever earned the name. Colonel Hayes was waiting at the end of the hall, standing at ease beside the security desk. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then he gave me a single slow nod. The nod of a commander who had watched one of his soldiers walk through the worst fire of her life and come out standing. I returned it. I adjusted the silver star on my chest, walked past him, and stepped out into the daylight. True family is defined by loyalty and honor, not by the toxic bloodline that tries to drag you into their darkness. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences in the comments if you have ever had to build a new life from the ashes of betrayal.